You keep thinking your life changes after some huge realization. A breakthrough, a breakdown, a perfect morning, a perfect plan. But most people become who they are through repetition. They stop noticing. That's the dangerous part. Because the human brain adapts to patterns way faster than it adapts to truth. You don't wake up one day and suddenly become disciplined, or anxious, or emotionally numb, or confident. You rehearse it quietly, daily, and eventually your identity starts feeling permanent. Even when it was built accidentally, you can see it in tiny moments. The way you immediately reach for your phone after waking up. The way you avoid one difficult conversation for 3 weeks. The way you restart your routines every Monday like your personality resets with the calendar. At first it feels harmless. Everybody does it. That's what you tell yourself. But here's what nobody realizes. Your brain is always collecting evidence about who you are, not who you want to be. Who you repeatedly prove yourself to be. And the weird part is, your mind believes actions more than thoughts. You can sit in your room for hours imagining a better future. You can consume productivity videos, buy planners, organize your desk, watch people transform their lives online while promising yourself you're about to lock in. Meanwhile, your brain is watching your actual behavior, and it's quietly adjusting your identity around it. That changes everything, because most people think they're fighting laziness. They're not. They're fighting unconscious self-definition. You say you want confidence, but every avoided risk teaches your nervous system. I'm someone who hides. You say you want discipline, but every promise you break teaches your brain. My words don't mean much. And after enough repetition, something subtle happens. You stop feeling conflicted about it. The behavior becomes familiar, then normal, then personal. Now that's just how I am. That sentence ruins more futures than failure ever will. Because once a behavior feels like identity, changing it feels emotionally threatening. Even when the behavior is hurting you. That's why people stay inside patterns they hate. Not because they enjoy suffering. Because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. Even miserable familiarity. You can see this everywhere. People staying in routines that drain them. Relationships that quietly shrink them, habits that make them feel heavy and disconnected, and still, they repeat them, because predictable pain feels easier than unfamiliar growth. But the strange part is, your identity is far more fragile than you think. One repeated action can slowly rewrite the way you see yourself. Not overnight. That's the fantasy everybody sells. Real transformation feels almost invisible in the beginning. That's why most people quit too early. They expect emotional fireworks. Instead, they get silence. You go to the gym for 4 days. Nothing changes. You wake up early for 1 week. Still tired. You start journaling, meditating, reading, trying harder, and your brain whispers, "See, this isn't working." But wait until you realize why that thought appears so quickly. Your brain values familiarity over improvement. That's its job. It wants efficiency, predictability, energy conservation. Growth threatens all three, so whenever you try becoming someone new, your mind interprets it as danger before progress. That's why self-sabotage often appears right after motivation, not because you're weak. Because your nervous system is trying to pull you back toward the identity it already recognizes. And this is where things start falling apart for a lot of people. They mistake discomfort for failure. That misunderstanding quietly destroys momentum. You start something meaningful, then panic when it feels unnatural. But of course it feels unnatural. You're interrupting years of unconscious repetition. You're asking your mind to accept a new version of you before it has enough evidence. That takes time. More time than most people tolerate, especially now. Everything around you trains impatience. Fast content, fast dopamine, fast validation. You post something and check your phone 6 times in 10 minutes. There's a version of you that already exists in fragments. Not fully formed, not complete, but visible in moments. You see it randomly sometimes. in the rare mornings where you actually keep your promise to yourself, in the conversations where you stop pretending, in those brief stretches where your mind feels clear and your actions finally match your intentions. And what's strange is, those moments don't feel fake. They feel familiar, like remembering someone you forgot you were. That matters more than you think, because deep down most people already know the direction their life is asking them to move toward. They just keep negotiating with discomfort. You say, "I'll start when I feel motivated, when things calm down, when I become more confident, when I'm mentally ready." But your life keeps moving while you wait for emotional certainty that never arrives. And slowly, waiting becomes identity. That's the trap. Not failure, delay. Quiet delay. The kind that looks harmless because nothing dramatic happens. You still go to work. Still answer texts. Still laugh at memes. Still tell people you're figuring things out. Meanwhile, months disappear. Then years. And eventually you realize something unsettling. You weren't stuck because life was confusing. You were stuck because your habits were voting for a version of you that your future no longer wanted. That realization hurts, but it also creates freedom. Because if repetition built your current identity, repetition can build a new one too, not instantly, not magically, but gradually enough for your nervous system to finally trust it. That's the part people underestimate, trust. You don't build self-respect through thoughts. You build it through evidence, tiny evidence, repeated consistently. You wake up when you said you would. You finish one difficult task instead of escaping into distraction. You sit with discomfort for 5 extra minutes instead of numbing it immediately. Your brain notices, even if nobody else does. And eventually those moments stack. Quietly. Until one day something strange happens. You stop negotiating with yourself as much. The habits that once felt impossible start feeling normal. Not exciting. Not cinematic. Normal. That's when real change begins. Because the goal was never permanent motivation. It was emotional familiarity with better behavior. And this changes the way you see discipline completely. Discipline isn't punishment. It's identity protection. It's deciding who deserves control over your future, your temporary emotions, or your deeper direction. Most people never consciously choose, they react. They let moods decide their actions, let stress decide their habits, let exhaustion decide their standards, and then they wonder why life feels unstable. But imagine waking up knowing your actions no longer depend entirely on emotion. Imagine trusting yourself again. Not perfectly, honestly. That kind of self-trust changes everything. Your posture changes, your conversations change, your standards change, even your anxiety changes. Because a lot of anxiety comes from watching yourself abandon yourself repeatedly. That's the hidden exhaustion nobody talks about. Not physical tiredness, internal disappointment, the weight of constantly knowing what you should be doing, while watching yourself avoid it. That disconnect drains people, more than work, more than stress, more than lack of sleep sometimes. And fixing it doesn't require becoming superhuman. It requires becoming congruent. Thoughts, actions, identity. Aligned. That's why tiny habits matter more than dramatic promises. Anybody can feel inspired for one night. Very few people can quietly repeat behaviors long enough for their identity to shift. And honestly, that process feels boring sometimes. Lonely too, because while you're changing internally, the outside world often looks exactly the same. No applause. No dramatic transformation montage. You're still sitting in the same room, still drinking coffee half awake, still fighting distraction, still catching yourself opening apps without thinking. But underneath those ordinary moments, a new person is being rehearsed. That's the invisible part of growth nobody respects until results appear. And by then, they call it talent, confidence, natural discipline. They never see the months where you kept choosing differently before it felt rewarding. But you'll know. You'll remember the version of yourself that almost stayed stuck. The version that kept postponing life because discomfort felt threatening. And maybe that's what maturity actually is. Realizing your future is shaped less by dramatic decisions and more by repeated ordinary moments nobody else notices. The way you speak to yourself when you fail. The way you spend empty hours. The things you consume daily. The promises you keep when nobody's watching. That's your real life, not the goals written in your notes app. Your repeated behaviors are your real beliefs. And maybe that sounds uncomfortable. Good. Some truths are supposed to feel uncomfortable before they become freeing, because once you see this clearly, you can't really unsee it anymore. You start noticing how every action quietly pulls you towards someone, not instantly, but inevitably. So the real question isn't, who do you want to become? The real question is, what version of yourself are your daily actions rehearsing right now? And if that answer makes you slightly uncomfortable, maybe that discomfort isn't something to escape. Maybe it's the first honest sign that you're finally paying attention.